Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're just going to give folks a few minutes to all load into our webinar, and I'll make opening remarks. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And I'll mention this in my opening remarks, but as traditional with the webinar, there is a Q&A function. Please use that throughout the evening. I will be taking themes and questions directly and ensuring that they all get answered today. So please feel free to use that function so that we can ask questions. Okay. So I see our attendees loading in have slowed down a little bit. So I am going to move forward and respect everybody's time. Welcome, everyone. I'm very pleased to have you join this evening. If you're looking for information regarding the Bus Rapid Transit project, last year we launched a web page dedicated to providing our membership with the latest. So you're welcome to check back on a regular basis and watch for additional announcements through our social media. There are several representatives here from Metrolinx as well as from Durham Region Transit who will be joining us, and I thank them for making the time to engage with our business membership this evening. And as I mentioned earlier, you're welcome to use the Q&A function. I'm going to be moderating and supporting to ensure that our business membership gets all their questions answered. And I'm now very pleased to introduce you and toss this opportunity over to Glenn Potier from GLPI. Over to you, Glenn.
Great. Thanks very much, Natalie, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the meeting regarding the local area design for the Durham-Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit Corridor. And just to echo a few things that Natalie said, thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. I know there's a lot of things that compete for your time and your attention and your interest in transportation issues in your community, and of course in your businesses is much appreciated. Some of you may have heard me say this before, but I do a fair bit of this kind of work, and it's my personal belief that people who like yourselves, who take time out of your busy personal and professional lives to contribute constructively to matters of civic and societal interest are always most deserving of our gratitude and respect. So thank you again for participating. And I look forward, as I'm sure do you, to a productive session. Again, for those of you whom I've not already met, my name is Glenn Potier. I'm the head of a firm called GLPI, and it's my pleasure to serve as the independent facilitator for this part of our meeting. So it might be important for you to know that I am not an employee of Metrolinx, nor am I an employee of any of the transportation consultants who've been hired to work on this initiative. My job is simply to serve as, again, an independent and neutral facilitator. The only bias I bring to the meeting, if you can call it a bias, is toward achieving the best result for us all.
It looked like
design.
Oh, there you are, Glenn. Sorry, you were. We couldn't hear you for a few minutes. I was just about to interrupt. Please proceed.
Am I back now? Great, thank you. So, yeah, it looks like we may be having a few internet issues. So just let me know again, Natalie.
Oh, Glenn, you're doing it again. Maybe you want to turn your video off. That might help with your bandwidth. How's that?
Can you hear me?
You're coming through there now, yep.
Okay. So the meeting has basically two key components. One is to share the broader BRT's design for the Whitby area. In essence, the design for outside of the downtown. And you'll also hear about some important context for the initiative, its status, the process, timeline, schedule, and so forth. The second thing we want to do is share what had initially been proposed for the downtown Whitby area and the newer refined alternative design for the downtown. And to their credit, the Metrolinx team have developed an updated concept for downtown Whitby that is designed to address some of the concerns that they had heard about from businesses and from others. And you'll hear more about this refined concept in a little bit, but it's designed to address issues relating to access and parking and community traffic, infiltration, and so forth. A number of people have said that the new idea has great merit, but we'll be interested in hearing what you have to say. So in addition, and I know the slide's up right now with the agenda, but in addition to sharing the Whitby area design, we want to do a few other things. We're obviously in the opening, welcoming remarks right now. Next, the team will provide an overview reminding everyone of what the project's all about. Again, including an overview of the broader area and the previous design. You'll get a status update. Again, we'll take you through the broader design and the new design for the downtown area, which is called the North Side Pedestrian Mall. And we'll talk about its implications for travel patterns, for parking, and so forth. And then we'll take, of course, throughout the evening, any questions or comments that you want to share about what is being proposed. And time permitting, we'll look to do a bit of what we call an AIM exercise, and I'll explain more of that a little bit later. And of course, we'll conclude by talking about next steps and where things go from here. So let me stop there, other than to just say a couple of other things about the project. And just so that we are all clear, our meeting tonight is not about whether the BRT initiative should proceed or whether the route is on the right street. Rather, the focus is on how to implement the design in the identified corridor in the most effective and context-sensitive manner. So in essence, tonight's session is asking, if we're going to proceed with this thing, with the route in the proposed location, how do we best do it while maximizing success for everyone? And just a reminder, again, many of you are familiar with Zoom. Natalie's hit the highlights. But if you do want to share any questions or comments, you can do so using either the written chat or through the written Q&A. And again, if you're not familiar with Zoom technology, you simply have to take your cursor and hover over the bottom of the screen, and you should see both of those there, both the chat and the Q&A. Just select them, and then feel free to share questions and comments that way. And again, Natalie will keep a keen eye out, and she'll jump in and share some of that information throughout the evening. So just before we launch into the presentation, let me single out just a couple of individuals that you will be hearing from shortly. First of all, we have Lee Karajali. She's the project manager with Metrolinx. And Lee, let me invite you to share a few words of welcome now before I introduce our other speaker.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Natalie, so much for hosting us tonight. Thanks everyone in the room for attending. I'll just echo what Glenn said. We really appreciate you taking time out of your evenings to speak to us and share your input and your feedback. I'll just mention that we also have on the panel Metro Getsky from Metrolinx, Vice President of Planning, as well as Lorraine Hunick from Durham Region. She's the Director of Rapid Transit and Transit-Oriented Development. So they'll be on hand to answer questions if needed. Thanks again, and I'll just give it back to you, Glenn.
Great, thanks, Lee. And in a moment, I'll more formally introduce David Hopper, but he's the co-consultant project manager with a firm called Parsons. And again, you'll hear from him shortly. I did want to note, though, in addition to the people that Lee just mentioned, we do have some other team members in attendance from Metrolinx, from Durham Region, from the consulting team, and so forth. They're here to observe, to contribute as appropriate, and to capture your feedback and generally assist with the process. So given that we have much to do, let's move to our next agenda item. And I'd like to now call on David Hopper, again, the co-consulting team project manager. He'll remind us of what the study's all about, bring us up to date on recent activity, but most importantly, he's going to take us through the overall design and the old and updated or refined design concept for downtown. And again, we'll take questions in a few places. If you want to hold them until then, that's great. But if you want to send them through the chat or the Q&A, Natalie will keep an eye out for them. David, over to you, sir.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. And thank you, Natalie, for organizing this. And we're glad to walk through this. So I'm going to try and go through this relatively quickly, and then we'll pause a couple of places for questions, and then we can always come back using the presentation as well. I'm just going to turn my camera off now because my presentation is over here and it's awkward to see me flashing on the side while I'm trying to talk. So I'll be back after the presentation. So this project is part of what is known as the 2041 Frequent Rapid Transit Network, and that is part of Metrolinx's plan to provide a holistic solution to the entire region. And so there are a number of elements in the east part of the plan. So we have this particular project. We also have the extension of the GO train, which is planned out to Bowmanville. There is a future BRT or LRT corridor up Simcoe Street in Oshawa to serve the Technical University, as well as plans for higher order bus priority on Taunton Road and some other of the north-south corridors. So this is an integrated plan that's been agreed to by all of the region. And what we're doing now is Metrolinx is taking it one piece at a time and moving it forward. And this is one of the ones in the East End that is moving forward first. So we do start at Scarborough Centre, so we connect both to the large employment node there, but also to the future Scarborough subway and the SRT. Coming out Ellesmere Avenue past the University of Toronto Scarborough campus, and then out the Highway 2 corridor. As we zoom in a little bit, we can see the reason we're doing this is this corridor connects downtown Oshawa, downtown Whitby, Pickering Village, downtown Pickering, as well as a number of educational institutions, a number of major shopping centers, some large retail and residential and office developments. So there is a lot of travel along this corridor where people could take transit if it were more available. We've also found that with the Durham Pulse service that's out there, we've seen a great uptick in ridership. The route today, the 900 service, which follows this corridor, is the most heavily traveled in Durham region today, carrying more than 3 million passengers a year. So we know there is the demand out here, and we're looking to improve the service to give people more options. So to give you just a bit of an overview of the project, we were chatting about this just before the presentation started. These projects take a long time to come from fruition to operation. So this actually dates back to as far as 2008 as part of Metrolinx's big move. Durham Pulse was launched in 2013 and is shown to be successful. Through 2017, 18, and 19, a number of other studies have come out that tie all of this work together with the master plans and the official plans for each of the municipalities in the region. And we are now most of the way through our preliminary design process and working towards the environmental project, which I'll get to in just a second. After we have environmental approval at the end of the year, we'll then move forward into detailed design and into procurement and then into construction and delivery. So we're a fair ways into this project, but there will be probably 6 to 10 years of construction. Not everywhere will be under construction for that full time. Each area will likely be under construction for 1 and possibly 2 seasons, but we'll start in different parts of the corridor and then fill in the key gaps and then work to join the whole system together. Just as an overview of the actual TPAP, or the Transit Project Assessment Process, which is the complicated provincial name for a class environmental assessment. It's divided into 2 phases. The first one is the pre-planning, where we do all of our background studies, look at alternatives, go through most of our consultation, assess the impacts and mitigations, do our preliminary engineering, and draft up a report. We're most of the way through that phase, and sometime later this spring, we're going to launch the formal 185-day process. When the report is ready to be released, it will come out with a notice of commencement. There's 120 days then for stakeholders to comment on the report. We then issue a notice of completion sometime in that period, up to 120 days later. There's then an additional 30 days for the public to see all of the comments on the report that have come from the other agencies, and then 35 days for the minister to make the decision. And the intent is to try and get this completed before the end of 2021. So let's go over some of the preliminary design work. I'm going to start on the outer parts of Whitby, and then we'll work our way into the downtown. So during our analysis, we found that we can really subdivide Whitby into 5 different sections. So if we think of the Brock Street and Dundas Street as the old core of Whitby, we have the intense core with the retail right at the corner. We have the more historic urbanized areas that stretch out as far as Garden and Cochrane. And then we have the newer urbanized and recently urbanizing areas further out than that. So starting at the west end in Zone 1, so from Lake Ridge Road to Cochrane Street, the intent is to widen the road from 4 lanes to 6 lanes so that we can have 2 dedicated BRT lanes in the middle of the road and maintain 4 lanes of general traffic as we have today. The reason we're doing this is we want to make sure that there's adequate road capacity for people who can't take transit and able to get around without using a lot of travel on side streets. Once we get in as far as Cochrane Street and as far from there in as Byron, the road is actually too narrow for us to widen for 6 lanes. So the intent there is to convert the 2 median lanes to BRT and have 1 lane of general traffic in each direction. Traffic volumes are slightly lower, and there are other routes on the grid for people to be able to get east or west without using Dundas Street. I'm going to skip over the green zone for a minute, but we'll come back to it. Zone 4 is the east end of the central area, so from Green Street out to Garden Street. Again, this is a fairly narrow road, and we will be converting 2 lanes to median BRT with 1 lane of general traffic in each direction. East of Garden Street and out to the border, just west of Thornton. Again, we're looking at ultimately widening the road from 4 lanes to 6 to put the BRT in the middle with 4 lanes of general traffic. There are a number of constraints to doing this. Obviously, the CP rail bridge is one of the big ones, and we are looking ultimately to replace that bridge. What that may mean is the section between Anderson and Garden is delayed further out in the process until we can get agreement with CP on how to replace that bridge. And then the downtown core in Zone 3 we'll get to a little bit further on in the presentation. So coming down to street level and looking at what this would look like at Dundas and Fothergill, we see a 6-lane roadway. We have a central raised median with bus lanes on either side. Then we have 2 lanes of general traffic, both eastbound and westbound. And we also have sidewalks and cycling facilities on both sides of the road. The intention in building the transit up is not just to facilitate people riding the bus, but facilitate people getting to and from the bus. So we want to fill in any gaps that there are in the sidewalk network and in the cycling network to encourage active transportation around the transit system. At the stops, we'll see in a minute, the design of the stops will be in these sections, will be out in the median of the road, much like they are on the Viva system along Highway 7 in York Region. And each stop will be accessed at a signalized intersection to make sure it's safe for people to get to and from the stops. So as I mentioned, ultimately this is being recommended for the stretch of Dundas Street west of Annis Cochrane and east of Garden Street. And what we're doing here is making sure that we provide traffic capacity for the volumes that we're predicting for 2041. We are taking into account developments that are being planned nearby. We've looked at the official planned road right-of-way that's protected for. We're also looking at how we can minimize any impact on heritage resources and cultural heritage resources. So we have done a full suite of environmental studies, and we're taking those into account as our design moves forward. The reason we're looking at the 6 lanes in the outer area, if we start in the west end, today there's about 1,400 vehicles per hour in each direction during rush hour. A single lane of traffic can really only handle about 850 cars. So there are actually more cars out there than can be carried on a single lane of traffic. We also see that by 2041, with the growth in Durham region, which is actually the highest of any region in the Greater Toronto Area, we expect that the traffic will grow by more than 20%. So that will be able to be carried on 2 lanes of traffic, but with only a single lane would lead to a lot of neighborhood infiltration. With the dedicated bus facility all the way across the region, we're expecting that the volumes will increase to somewhere between 1,600 and 1,800 per hour in each direction. So that actually is equivalent to more than 1 lane of traffic and pretty close to 2 lanes of traffic. So it also allows for future growth. A BRT like this could handle upwards of 3,000 or 4,000 people an hour. So that does provide us with good capacity to gently change people's behavior to move more and more to public transit as growth happens and congestion increases. Similarly, on the east side, we have a slightly lower traffic volume. It's in the 800 to 1,400 per hour range. And we see the transit usage will also be slightly lower in the 1,000 to 1,500 passengers per hour per direction, but still more than can be carried in 1 lane of traffic. As we get closer in and we have the older buildings that are close to the sidewalk, particularly the retail spaces, like we see here at Center Street, the design is to maintain the existing curbs and repurpose the 2 median lanes for buses. And then we would have to do some local widening where we have stops, for instance, at Henry Street, at Euclid Henry, and at Hickory. So we would bump out slightly in those particular spots. Here again, the traffic volumes are slightly lower, and we believe that the 4 lanes does provide good accessibility for everyone needing to go through the area and get to everything in the area. And so the recommendation is to carry the 4-lane option from Cochrane as far east as Byron and from Green Street as far east as Garden. The reason we can do this here is there is the regular grid street in the historic downtown, which is one of the most excellent ways to move people around. In fact, cities that have regular grids of streets, like downtown Whitby, see far less traffic congestion than cities that are like Boston, where the streets are on a much more of a curvilinear pattern. There's also a fairly narrow road right of way, so the impact of widening to 6 lanes would be not acceptable to the local community. A number of the buildings are very close to the property line, as well as we get closer to downtown, there are more cultural heritage resources that we need to protect. Now, one of the things we do realize is that by introducing BRT and having a median down the middle of the road, that will change the way people travel. So like you may have seen on Highway 7, the intent here is to consolidate all of the people that need to turn in and out of local side streets and driveways would be reduced to a right in, right out only. If you're coming westbound, instead of turning left into the local side street, you would go to the next traffic signal and you would be allowed to make a U-turn along with a left turn phase on a dedicated phase to be able to come around and then come back into the driveway. Similarly, if you had come eastbound and come into that side street, you could then turn out, go to the next intersection and make a U-turn and then head back. So this is actually in alignment with the Vision Zero. So where we look at widening roads to 6 lanes, we're looking at introducing a median regardless of whether or not there are BRT lanes, just to improve safety. Our traffic analysis has taken into account that we will see extra volumes making the left turns and the U-turns at these intersections, and we believe that that all works. This will also require that large trucks will have to change their routes, and so that will be communicated out to the trucking industry, and it will also be sort of part of all of the online tools we have like Google Maps, so that people know where they can go. We do know that ambulances and smaller trucks will still be able to make the U-turn. It's only when we get to large tractor trailers that they will not be able to make the U-turn, and we'll have to find a different route to service businesses. So I just wanted, this is a video that was prepared by York Region Rapid Transit to show people how the buses and the traffic and the pedestrians function. So I'm just going to click on the link here and we'll run this short video to see how that functions. And it'll just pop up here in a second, I hope. Here we go. Just takes a minute to load here. We found up on York Region that this is a very safe for pedestrians. They always cross at signalized intersections. You can see here now the left turning traffic, left turn and U-turns get a green phase while the buses are stopped. Once the U-turn and the left turn traffic is cleared, we then will see a green light for the eastbound and westbound traffic along with the buses. The buses will use stop at the far side stop, so for boarding and alighting of passengers at a dedicated facility with off-board fare collection and amenities for passengers that are waiting. That helps speed up the boarding and alighting process. It also allows the buses to move forward once they've done all their boarding and alighting without having to wait for the light. And then when the light changes, we see pedestrians will cross to and from the island to get to the bus stop or to come from the bus. There's also a refuge in the middle of the road so that if people need more time to cross the street, they can cross in 2 stages. So there'll also be a push button there to call your pedestrian walk signal. So this has been very successful in terms of making it a very easy way to get around and to use the system.
David, it's
Yes.
Natalie. There is a timely question, so I thought I would introduce it. It's
Sure.
from Brian Ruck. And the question is, how will the conflicts between U-turns and right turns be handled, as this is often a significant collision concern at these types of intersections?
That's a good question. So we are making sure that in a lot of the areas we have the 2 receiving lanes. So you should be able to make the U-turn into the inside lane, and the right turning cars would be to the outside lane. We will be looking to make sure that that's also a behavior that is learned quite quickly. We found on Highway 7 that people understand the left turns because they've seen signs. We may also look at putting some right turn restrictions, no right turn on red, if we find that there are either visibility issues or if we find a particular safety issue that arises. But we've found ways to manage it on the other system.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned off the top, one of the reasons we're looking at this corridor is there is a lot of growth planned. So there are a number of dedicated, designated future growth areas in the 3 downtowns. Pickering has working on a new downtown plan as well. It is centered around the route. And so not only is there development plan, but there's all kinds of development. So that allows people to both live and work in the corridor. As well, people can connect from north-south bus routes and make good connections at all of the stops in order to continue their journey along the corridor. So we do see great potential with this service to increase the number of transit-oriented developments that come along, and make sure that we can handle everybody who wants to live, work, and play in this community. So some of the concerns we've heard are about the right in, right out access and the walkability of a 6-lane roadway. We do have to remove some trees to build this. There is a tree compensation plan planned as part of this. Opportunities to improve active transportation we've taken to heart, and not only is this entire service fully accessible, but the intent is to fill in all the gaps in the sidewalk and the cycling networks. We are looking to increase business accessibility for employees in particular by giving them more opportunities to come by transit, as well as people coming to your businesses. And we see that the service does provide the opportunity to bring more people and more business along the corridor. We have been discussing with CP Rail about replacing the bridge so that we can get the 6-lane in, and they have agreed that they will work with us to do this, so we can provide space to fill in another gap, which right now is a very narrow sidewalk that follows underneath the CP Rail corridor. So we will be able to have both sidewalks and cycling facilities through there. So I think before we jump into the downtown section, I want to turn it back to Glenn, and we can see, or to Natalie, and see if there's any questions about the outside of the downtown area that we can address before we move on.
Great,
No,
thanks for,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, Natalie, I was just going to say thanks, David, and hello again, everyone. I know some of you have joined us in progress. For those who have done so, you've been listening to David Hopper. He's the co-consulting team project manager who is working with Metrolinx. My name is Glenn Pache. I'm serving as the independent facilitator for the meeting. We have our video turned off to conserve bandwidth. But Natalie, let me go back to you. Are you seeing any other questions or comments from any of our participants? And for those, again, for those of you who've joined us in progress, you can share your questions and comments through either the written chat or through the written Q&A. But Natalie, is there anything else at this point?
Thank you, Glenn. We did receive one question via email, actually, and it was from a participant who noticed that we were recording the session. Yes, we are recording the session, and it will be available on our BRT dedicated webpage by the end of next week.
Great, thank you. Anything else at this point, Natalie?
Just received something in the chat, and the question is, what is the expected start date?
Okay,
So Brent,
David,
yeah, that's a great question. So, so the service is actually already running. So the 900 bus is what will run on this facility once it's built. The intention is to finish the EA this year and get into detailed design, and then start physical construction in the corridor sometime in probably 2022 or possibly 2023. And construction would continue for 5 or 6 years after that. We're still working on the exact sequence. We know there are curbside lanes through Pickering. Those will be converted to median lanes right at the very end. So what we're trying to do is balance a little bit of construction in each municipality and get to the points that have the worst congestion first, so that we can see some benefits on transit. So I think the earliest we're going to see construction would be the summer of 22. In downtown Whitby, in the central section, it's likely going to be a year or two after that.
great, thanks, David. Natalie, anything else at this point?
Nothing at this point, thanks. I'll interrupt. Oh, one sec. Oh, thank you, Rachel. If anybody's interested in understanding where this dedicated BRT page is, Rachel has put it in the chat room, so you're welcome to access it there.
Great,
Thanks,
thank
Rachel.
you. So let me invite David. Let's go back to you to take us through the rest of the presentation. And again, we'll take more questions and comments as we go, and in particular, once you've finished. Go ahead, David.
Sure, great, thanks, Glenn. And yes, so there is a different solution for the downtown. It's quite an interesting challenge. There is, a fairly vibrant business interest in the downtown core. There's a desire to make it more walkable and more friendly. There's a desire to keep parking on the street for businesses. There's a desire to improve transit. And what we're finding is there just isn't enough physical space to do all of those things. And so what we're trying to find is a balanced solution that addresses everybody's concerns. So in our initial analysis in the fall of 2019, as part of our second round of consultation, our preferred option was to convert the 2 curb lanes to BRT and leave the 2 traffic lanes in the middle of the road. This would have provided good priority for transit, good reliability and comfort, good convenience, and that boarding and lighting passengers would be right at the sidewalk. And staying inside the existing curb lanes would minimize any potential impacts to existing buildings. The challenge with this, though, is that on-street parking would need to be relocated. There would be a challenge with deliveries, particularly in the peak hours, because there would be no access to the curb. So deliveries would have to happen from side streets or from rear accesses. And then with the buses being in the right-hand lane, any turns in and out of driveways and local side streets or left turns across introduces conflicting traffic with the buses, which takes away some of the reliability. So what we heard was there were concerns about the on-street parking being moved. There were concerns about general traffic impacts. There was concern about the ridership and whether there were enough riders to justify it. There was a major concern about there not being any improvements to the streetscape downtown. And so some suggestions that we took back were to look at considering one-way traffic through downtown. We looked at a number of different options for that. We looked at where we could find space for wider sidewalks and additional pedestrian crossings. And we also went as far as looking at whether or not in the downtown we could go to a transit and pedestrian mall where there would be no general traffic, but only transit and pedestrians. So that was the design we came forward with last fall. And the idea here was to convert the 2 curb lanes to wider sidewalks. So we would more than double the width of the sidewalks. And we would leave the 2 center lanes for BRT. We see that this will see a good uptake in ridership. Today, there is about 900 people who board and alight per day through the central area, and about 900 people per hour that are riding the bus eastbound and westbound. And in 2041, we see those numbers will double to around 15 to 1,800 boardings and alightings and about 1,500 people per hour in each direction. So we see a pretty healthy increase in ridership as we move through here. We proposed this to run on Dundas from Byron to Perry Green Street. And so we would have sort of 1 block on either side of Brock where we would have this facility. And that also allows us to integrate the stop for westbound on the west side of Brock and eastbound on the east side of Brock into this wider pedestrian realm. There was also a benefit that with the wider sidewalks, they could be graded slightly differently. So we might be able to ramp up to the doors of businesses to help improve accessibility and get rid of the steps at the doors. That's a challenge today because any ramp sticks too far out into the sidewalk. This would also create public space that could be used for patio dining. It could be used for sidewalk sales. It could be event space for things like a farmer's market or an art show. It could be other community events that are down here. So we think there's a lot of programming opportunities to help bring more people and make this a livelier place and attract more business. So potentially this is what it could look like. We see the sidewalk has been widened significantly. We see the potential for patio dining and a lot more activity. We also see that there's the opportunity in set locations to allow for delivery vehicles to come in and pull up onto the wider sidewalk, particularly in the off-peak hours to service the local businesses. So while we would lose the on-street parking and it would be relocated very nearby, we found a spot actually at Elm and Byron that we can replace almost all of the parking. We would still allow deliveries, and of course emergency vehicles would also be allowed to come through here in order to get across the downtown area. So we felt this was a good balance. It provides a high degree of transit priority. It provides a much improved pedestrian realm on both sides of the street. And there are ways for the traffic to get around the area and still serve the businesses. So when we first brought this forward, there was concern about some of the impact on the businesses, the loss of parking, the potential for neighborhood traffic infiltration, again, with the number of riders being there. And would this help improve the character of downtown, or would it be detrimental? And so we looked at some suggestions that we got about relocating parking, allowing some general traffic to come through to at least provide some eyesight on the business frontages for people in their cars, and how we would work, concerns about how we would work with the businesses during design and construction, and developing some traffic management plans during construction. And so we came up with some good ideas I'm going to show you now. And so the idea here was to provide that balance between transit priority, business access, and traffic, knowing that we're looking at a future where we're going to see a lot more travel and a lot more people choosing public transit as a way to get around. And so we're trying to find a way to balance all that given our limited capacity. So in the refined design, it's somewhat similar in that we would see the sidewalk widened on the north side between Brock and Byron only. On the south side, we would reinstate the single eastbound traffic lane. So cars driving eastbound would still be able to go through and have access to the businesses. There's still no on-street parking. That would still be relocated, as we had talked about before. There's still some challenges with deliveries. There would be the possibility of a dedicated space on the north side for deliveries, but with a single lane of traffic on the south side, deliveries could still be a bit of a challenge. What this does do is allow for some traffic through here. It also reduces the infiltration of traffic into the local neighborhood, particularly for eastbound. And you might be asking why we would reinstate the eastbound lane and not the westbound lane. The answer to that is twofold. Number one, the traffic volume eastbound in the evening is higher than the traffic westbound in the morning. And secondly, as we can see on this plan, the challenge we have is even today, there's essentially 5 lanes that approach Brock Street from the east. There's the extra lane that is the right-hand turn to go north. So what that will allow us to do is allow traffic to come through westbound past Perry Street, access in and out of the funeral home site and the laneway behind the bank, but then turn to go north on Mary Street or north on Brock Street. And that way the BRT lanes and the through eastbound lane and the platforms all line up across the intersection. So what would happen in this case is the westbound traffic would come through and turn right. There would be an opportunity to make an unsignalized left-hand turn at Elm for people, particularly who are moving to this enlarged parking lot that we're proposing in behind the businesses. If that is busy, or you know that that time of day the left turn is challenging, you would proceed north to Mary, where we would extend the left turn lane, turn left on Mary. We would install a new traffic light at Mary and Brock, or sorry, Mary and Byron to bring people back down, and then you would turn right again onto Dundas Street. So it's a 2-block detour. Eastbound, there would be a through lane all the way across. So we wouldn't see nearly the amount of traffic infiltration, particularly on the south side. And we believe that this detour will manage a good chunk of the detour traffic headed westbound. This plan is also designed that should the town decide in the future that they want to extend the transit mall, either in the Perry to Brock block by closing this lane, or on the south side of the street, the bus platforms and the lane configuration are already set up so that that can be achieved relatively easily with very little redesign or rework.
David?
Yes.
It's Natalie. Sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to confirm what you're showing us now is a draft preliminary design based on feedback from the community earlier on, so that in fact there is no transit malls currently planned for east of Brock. Is that correct? We just have a question from the owner of WC Town Funeral Chapel, and I want to make sure we're clear that there will no longer be a transit mall on that side of the street.
That's correct. There would still be one westbound lane of traffic to provide access in and out of the funeral home parking lot, and then to be able to carry on and turn right at Brock Street.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to make sure his business was no longer impacted from a transit mall perspective, which was the original design.
That's correct. We would only have the benefit of the widened sidewalk on the north side between Brock and Byron in this configuration.
Thanks so much.
And Natalie and David, I see that the owner of the funeral home, I think, has sent another question in. So why don't we deal with it right now? They're saying that they see the change. However, they're wondering whether there will be enough space for a funeral hearse to make the turn from the property to the street. David, can you address that?
So I think as we get into detailed design, that is something we need to have a look at. That is obviously a concern. We haven't checked that yet, but there would still be the ability, if absolutely necessary, to swing out into the bus lane to get around the corner and then back into the travel lane. There would the hard barrier between them would be out in the middle of the road, so there would be the ability to swing into that lane, provided you've checked that there's no bus coming. But there are opportunities here, and that's definitely one of the detailed design questions that we would need to address moving forward. That's a good point.
And just to confirm, it will only be right-hand turns coming out of the businesses or driveways along Highway 2. So the hearse
That's
would only
correct.
have the opportunity to turn right with this.
That's correct.
Great,
Now
David.
that's our current thinking. Oh, as we get into detailed design, we may find that that becomes a challenge for how that particular business operates, and we may have to look at, if there were some major reason or some very good reason why, we may look at the opportunity of allowing a pay duty officer or some special arrangement to allow left turns out. But for now, we're assuming that all of the driveways and all the local side streets that don't have traffic lights would be right turn in, right turn out only.
Great, David, we'll let you continue with the presentation. We'll take some more questions afterwards. Go ahead.
Great, thanks. So addressing the comments that we've seen, so we do believe that we can replace all of the parking within 75 to 250 meters of their original location. So that's only a sort of a 1 to 3 minute walk. And we want to encourage more active transportation in the downtown. Having the drive-by traffic eastbound was seen as critical to business success, to have eyes on the storefronts. So providing the eastbound lane does that. It also provides for less traffic infiltration for eastbound traffic. And the improvements we've made for westbound will limit traffic infiltration for westbound. It does maintain access for deliveries. Some of the spots that might be a little bit challenging, particularly in the peak periods, but it does maintain access for deliveries. It does create a good public realm in the sort of northwest quadrant on the north side of the street between Brock and Byron, and would serve as a model for the ability to extend that further if that's desired. It would improve accessibility into the buildings in that quadrant, because there would be enough space to introduce ramps into the door fronts. And this still maintains all of the cultural heritage features because we're still staying within the curb line of the existing road. So just looking at a cross section, sort of looking at the north side pedestrian mall, we're looking eastbound from Byron. We see we have the widened sidewalk on the north side with the ramps for the businesses. We would integrate the transit stop as well. We would have the 2 BRT lanes, and then we would have the 1 eastbound traffic lane along the curb with the existing south sidewalk maintained. And the way this is laid out in the future, this traffic lane and the sort of the white space in here that will go around the platform could be converted by extending this out and increasing and expanding the transit mall on the south side in the future if that's desirable. So in terms of the issue of traffic infiltration, we have done some fairly extensive work. And so what we're seeing is that of the traffic that is on Dundas Street today, about 20% of it is actually going all the way across without stopping in Whitby. So it's cars that start in Oshawa or further east and go to Ajax and further west and don't actually stop in the downtown. There are other cars that are coming in from the east that go into the road network, and then people within Whitby come out of the local communities and get back onto Dundas Street. So it looks equally busy all the way across, but it's actually different cars at the east end of town than at the west end of town. What we see is there are going to be some neighborhood trips that are generated that will use some local side streets. So this is focusing on the eastbound in the evening. We see with the through lane, we have about 1,200 cars approaching at just east of McQuay Boulevard. And about 800 of those will go straight through. Some turn off and use Annis and Brock and some of the other side streets to go down into the local area. They also use Cochrane and some of the other side streets to turn up. And then cars coming out of those neighborhoods will join in to form the 1,000 cars that head eastbound at the end of town. So as I was noting, this analysis was done based on some information we collected from a company called Streetlight. And what it is an anonymized cell phone data. So we looked at the movements from February 2019 to January 2020, so pre-pandemic. We looked at the AM and PM peak hour Monday to Thursday, which gives us a good sense of the heaviest times of day. So this information shows routes through the network, but it does not actually show us the beginning or the end of each trip. That's all stripped away, and there is no way to actually reverse engineer this data to follow any one particular car. And if the same car is making multiple trips, like you make a morning trip and an afternoon trip every day, they're not linked together. So there's actually no way to see if somebody is making the same trip over and over. What we found, as I mentioned, is 20% of the trips are going all the way straight through. And we believe that as congestion starts to grow, those trips will find other routes like Rossland and Taunton or down to the 401 to bypass downtown Whitby. There's about a third of the trips, or 34%, that begin or end in the downtown area. So those trips are already making most of their trip on local side streets and only a portion of it on Dundas Street. So the portion on Dundas may change with them moving and continuing their trip on local streets. The balance of the trips, or about 46%, are medium distance trips, but they're entirely within the town of Whitby. So for instance, that's somebody who lives in the Northwest and happens to need to go down to a job in the Southeast, or lives in the Southwest and is going up to visit somebody in the Northeast. So those trips tend to rely more on the north-south streets like Garden and Brock and Cochrane-Annis to a lesser degree. And so, but use Dundas as a way to kind of come up and across and up. They will change their pattern slightly to go all the way up and across or all the way down and across using some of the other collector streets. So one of the questions we've been asked is, well, what does this do to the capacity of the roadway? So in this new design, we see on the top side, we're planning to carry about 1,500 per hour on the buses by 2041. As I noted, that's only about half of the ultimate capacity for the transit service. And we can carry about 850 cars in the eastbound lane. If the full mall were introduced either in the short term or in the longer term, those 850 cars need to find an alternate route, and we would be carrying the 1,500 people on the buses by 2041. And of course, we have about the same number of pedestrians in both scenarios. This is sort of another version of the same thing, but westbound in the morning. So we see about 800 people approaching from the east. Several hundred of them have already chosen Rossland or Taunton or 401. As we get in, we start to see them peeling off on Anderson and Garden, and then using some of the local side streets to go north on Brock or to go south. And then we start to see people coming out of the local community and adding to those traffic volumes. They would make the detour using Mary and Byron. About 300 people will do that, and then they will be joined by more people leaving to see 500 to 600 coming out to the west end of downtown. So that's the impact on traffic, but what is the actual impact on transit? So we looked at the travel times from end to end. So this is the trip from downtown Oshawa to Scarborough Centre, and what we're finding is on any one particular portion of it, the benefits are proportional. So today that takes about 50 minutes to drive. But it takes about 100 minutes on the bus. So the bus trip is at least twice as long as the car trip. With BRT in place and having the priority, the less friction on the buses and a more reliable service, we get down to a 75 to 85 minute trip. So that's actually quite a significant increase, which will make transit much more competitive and attract a lot more riders to the system and ultimately increase the capacity of the road to carry people. As I noted, in 2018, we had about 900 people getting on and off in the downtown area, 900 riders per hour at Brock, about 5,400 a day. By 2041, our predictions are seeing 1,500 boardings and alightings and 1,500 per hour going through for about 9,000 people. And along the entire corridor, we're seeing 6,400 riders just in the peak hour and more than 38,000 riders per day. So part of the benefit of providing priority all the way along the corridor is if there's delays here in Whitby, they work their way all the way along and slow down everybody all the way along the corridor. So what are we going to do to help communicate and things as we move forward into design and construction? So Metrolinx has community relations and communications specialists that will be helping to form committees to look at this. We will have a community office out there during construction to address issues, a 24-hour phone line, regular stakeholder meetings. We'll have these construction liaison committees to help address issues proactively. We'll be working with groups like the Chamber and the BIA, as well as others, to look at marketing and other campaigns, signage and wayfinding, as well as traffic routing, to make sure that communities are impacted as little as possible. We do know that construction is challenging, so there will be impacts for sure, but we're looking at what we can do to mitigate those. There will be future virtual open houses and meetings. Some of them will be like this. Some of them hopefully will someday be in person again. And we'll also be having regular information available to the community, as well as regular updates on the website. In terms of impacts and mitigation, during construction, we see disruption to access, loss of parking, disruption to curbside activities, temporary closures of sidewalks, congestion due to construction, along with all of the fun visual effects that come with construction activity. We're looking at how we develop an action plan to help support businesses and an ambassador program like we've done on other projects. Looking at alternative parking and curbside management. So we would plan ahead. How are we going to pick up your garbage? How are we going to get deliveries? How are we going to get people to and from the front door? How are emergency vehicles going to get through? And creating all of these control plans in order to make sure we keep the impacts to a minimum during the construction time. So Glenn, that's sort of the end of the presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to you to either see if there are more questions or walk us into the AIM exercise.
Great. Thanks very much, David, for the comprehensive overview presentation. Much appreciated. So yeah, the Metrolinx team would love to get your thoughts on the design and any feedback you want to share with them. But before we go there, let's quickly check in with Natalie and see if there are any questions of fact or clarification, or if there's anything that our attendees would like the team to further explain or make more understandable. Natalie, has anything come in? Are there any further questions at this point?
There was one through the chat earlier about clarifying or asking how busy this line will be. But our last slide, 36, actually answered that question. It provided very detailed information about ridership currently and the number of cars currently going up and down this route. So I'm assuming that answered the question for the individual asking.
David, is there anything you want to add about the frequency of vehicles, the busyness of the streets?
So in terms of service frequency on the BRT, we're looking at least a 5-minute service in the AM and PM peak, slightly less frequently in the midday and the evenings. But we also expect, as ridership grows, we could start to see buses every 2 or 3 minutes when we get out beyond 2041.
Thank you. Anything else, Natalie, before we launch into getting people's feedback on the design and the concept?
Not at this time.
Okay, great. Jump in if other questions come in. So again, I mentioned that Metrolinx and their team would love to get your feedback on what has been presented. So let's turn our attention now to getting your thoughts. And we'd like to use something we call the AIM exercise, just to give the conversation a bit of structure. And David, if you could move to the next slide, that would be terrific. So you see the 4 titles there. AIM is an acronym. The A is for advantages. The I is for impediments, the M is for mitigation, the other M is for maybes. So why don't we start off with the advantages? The team is interested in knowing what you like about the concept. What are its strengths? What's good about it? What is resonating positive from your point of view? What makes it desirable? What are some of the benefits that you anticipate from it? Now, again, I know it's a little difficult in this kind of form where we sort of live and all together in person. You would just kind of jump in and it would be an open conversation. We do need you tonight, given the way that the webinar has been set up, to share your thoughts in writing, again, either through the Q&A function or through the chat. But if you have a moment now, and again, the team would be most appreciative of this, if you'd like to share any perceived advantages at this point, that would be terrific before we move into some of the other categories. So I'll give you a moment to think a little bit about that. And while you're doing that, I'll just go through the other headings and explain what we're looking for there as well. But don't wait to send in any advantages. Shoot them through the written chat or the Q&A whenever you're ready. We'll then be moving to getting your thoughts about impediments. So basically, what do you see as some of the weaknesses of the design, some of the disadvantages of the concept? Maybe there are some things that don't make great sense to you, or that you believe are potentially problematic, or that might be potential flaws. We'll look for those as well. But if you have the opportunity to think about how we might mitigate those impediments, and by that we mean, how can we address your concerns or objections? How can the perceived weaknesses or the disadvantages or the flaws be mitigated, reduced, or eliminated? We'd love to get your thoughts on that as well. And then lastly, the maybes is, what are some of the outstanding questions you have, or uncertainties related to the concept, or major questions or unknowns? We'd love to, again, on behalf of the team, get some of that. So let me stop there. Natalie, I know people have probably had a long day at their businesses already, but has anybody sent in any written responses to either the advantages or to any of those other questions?
We have one. I think, there's a question regarding the construction phase, which I'll get to, but I was going to comment that probably a lot of the people who are listening to this presentation right now might have not, or are seeing it for the first time potentially. So they haven't really thought through the advantages, but they are always welcome to email me with any questions or concerns. I will absolutely pass them along to both Metrolinx as well as the region. There is a comment in the chat. During the construction phase, will the road in front of the funeral home still be accessible? Having witnessed both the St. Clair Street car project and presently the Eglinton project in Toronto, the road impact on funeral operations has been very challenging.
So David, would you like to jump in and or anyone from Metrolinx and address the questions and comments?
Sure, I can start. So the intent would be to maintain access to all businesses. We know that that will be challenging at times. And for instance, there are 2 driveways into the parking lot. So it may be, we may have to reduce access to only 1 driveway at certain times while work is going on. We're trying to find ways to reduce that. Part of it's going to depend on how many of the utilities underneath the road need to be changed out, as well as the actual resurfacing of the road. So what we're going to do is, as we move forward into detailed design, that's one of those community liaison committees we're going to set up, is to understand specific needs of the different businesses, as to see how we mitigate that and how we can continue to provide access. We understand construction can be challenging, but we will work the best we can to make sure that access is maintained to the highest degree possible. I don't know whether, Mathieu, you wanted to add anything to that?
Thanks, David. No, I think that's clear. We always know during the construction phase it's challenging, so we have to just be very careful about the staging. And as you mentioned earlier, I would say I thought you were very optimistic in some of the construction dates that you provided first. I thought you said, summer of 2022 sounds very early, because we have to go through approvals, kind of funding approvals, procurement, and then the staging, because that's really the key, is to be able to do it as effectively as possible. So that means if there's any utility work that needs to be done, then we want to group them together so that the construction phase doesn't drag on. So that's kind of that careful staging piece that's really important to minimize the impacts during construction. And we have, and we have some lessons learned from some of the construction projects that you're mentioning here. I don't think we're at the level of complexity of a project like the Eglinton Crosstown, where we know, especially at Yonge and Eglinton, it's been especially complicated, but with a very high level of complexity. They're crossing the LRT and the subway. Here it's still a bit more straightforward, but there is careful kind of design that's needed to minimize that. And you know, and with the communications teams here, where we have developed kind of the new methods with these local committees to make sure that we're understanding all of the daily constraints that and their daily operations that they have, so that we can adjust the construction phasing and spatial layout as to least impact these operations.
Great, thanks, Matthew. So given what Natalie has said, that some of you may be seeing this for the first time, you may need more time to digest it, give it some more thought. She's invited you to send any other questions or comments to her post-meeting as they might occur to you. Why don't we just open it up at this point and ask, are there any other questions, comments, or if you do want to share anything in response to the AIM exercise, feel free to do that as well. And we'll get in as many as we can before we wrap up. And I don't think we'll go too much longer this evening. We'll look to get you out of here well before 7 o'clock. But Natalie, are you getting any other questions or comments? We'll kind of treat this as a bit of an open forum.
I did receive one. With respect to the community stakeholders and sort of those smaller groups as you're planning out construction and the phases, will you be engaging community members or business members that are local or have an interest in supporting this project? So not delaying it, but providing actual feedback, boots on the ground. I've had several people approach me in terms of lending a hand to supporting the more detailed planning. Would that be an option, or is that strictly with Metrolinx in the region?
No, that's exactly. I mean, we talked earlier in at one of the panels, and I think it was in December, about establishing community liaison committees. And that's exactly for that. So it's both to understand what are the constraints, but also to see how that can fit best, and how we can get some support, how we can also use some look, because we know information, for example, to be able to provide information as broadly as possible to the community. That relies, we need some relays, kind of, who are boots on the ground, who can help us with that. So we'll really leverage that, and we're very happy to bring you on board these committees. And if you can help to get the word out, the more feedback and the more two-way communication we can get on the project, especially when we get closer to construction, the better it will be.
Wonderful. So as you're ready to form them or need that detailed feedback, I'm sure both Carrie and I have access to lots of individuals who'd be happy to support that endeavor, to make sure that we're causing the least amount of issue and resistance throughout Highway 2. I think it's an important project, but we want to make sure that we're providing the correct support and insight. Thank you.
Natalie, and just to add to that, I think, thank you, Mathieu and David, for answering that question, and Natalie for bringing it up. The timeline we're looking at is really using the rest of the year to reach out to people and start gathering that interest and those contacts. So we'll work closely with you and Carrie Ann for sure to get that going. And then we're hoping to formally launch by probably the end of the year or early next year. But we want to really take the time to build those out properly.
Perfect. Thanks.
Great. Natalie, anything else? Any other questions, comments from any of our attendees?
Nope, nothing in the chat, nothing in the Q&A, and I've now have not received anything. So we're good.
Okay. So there's one other mitigation measure that we've talked about at a number of venues that wasn't actually in the presentation, which I think is important for people to see, and that is the possibility of testing this transit mall process.
Oh, right, downtown.
And that was done on, like, the King Street streetcar pilot. So the sidewalk widenings were done with temporary wood platforms to extend out into the curb lane, so we could try it out, get the signage up, try it for over the summer and through one fall. So we sort of see it in the peak of the outdoor season, and then see how it works as we transition into fall. And that might allow us to fine tune some things in the field with a little bit of lumber and a little bit of paint, as opposed to when we're actually moving asphalt around. So I think if anyone has any ideas about when you might like to see or not like to see some kind of, I mean, obviously we're not going to do it this summer. Next summer is probably a challenge as well, but we would want to get out in a couple of years and see that kind of a pilot might be another way to show in the real world what the effects are that we're modeling, because our models are good, but they're not necessarily perfect.
Great, thanks, David. So Natalie, last call, anything else? Has anything come in? No, we're still good?
No, we are still good.
Okay,
and
so
I do welcome people. If you're feeling a little shy, you can send me a note privately or even follow up with an email, and I'll be sure to pass this information along.
terrific. Thank you, Natalie. So just before we wrap up, let me invite Lee Karajali again, the project manager from Metrolinx, to just talk about any further next steps that she hasn't mentioned already, and also to share any observations she might have about what she's heard this evening. Lee, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Glenn, and thank you, everyone. So let me start with next steps. So we've been presenting to a lot of would-be advisory committees, and we'll continue to do so. These are our old next steps, but we have tonight's presentation to the Chamber of Commerce. And what we will have next week on March 16th is a public event, so open to the broader community, and you're welcome to attend again if you want to. We'll be presenting the same information, probably at a higher level than you've seen tonight. And then what we'll do is just leave things available on our website for a week, so you can give us your comments then if you don't have a chance to attend our public meeting. And then what we're also trying to do in parallel is we're working with Carrie and Natalie to reach out to some key community leaders or community contacts to make sure that everyone is well aware of the public meeting we're having next week, and that we do get some meaningful feedback from the community. In terms of longer term next steps, right now we are finalizing our preliminary design in consultation with stakeholders, as you can see tonight. We are also preparing what we call the draft environmental project report. So that is part of the environmental assessment process, the provincial one. And so that will be kicked off in mid-2021, so later this year. It's a 120-day process, and we'll be hosting another round of formal consultation during that environmental assessment process to gather more, to present more information, on environmental assessments and impacts, and gather more feedback then. What I've heard tonight, I think overall key concerns are obviously construction impacts and construction mitigation. And as David and Mathieu said, that is at the forefront of our work as the project advances. We've noted all the concerns about funeral home access. And so that's something we'll also look forward to working with you on. And other than that, community liaison committees, we're very excited to see your enthusiasm for that. And we will be in touch. I'm not just saying that, we will be. I just need to get a few things out of the way, and then our comms staff will be reaching out to make this happen. Thank you so much again for attending tonight.
Great, thanks, Lee. So just before I hand things back to Natalie to draw things to a close, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you, Natalie, and to the Chamber for setting up this meeting. Your efforts are much appreciated. Thank you to all of those tonight for participating and for sharing any questions or comments. As Natalie's invited you to do, please give this some more thought. And if you want to send additional questions or comments post-meeting, she'd be more than happy to receive those and pass them along to the team. So thank you again for the opportunity of working with all of you. I'll now hand things back to Natalie for any closing words and the formal adjournment of the meeting. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much, Glenn. And thank you to all of you, not just for joining us, but for sticking in and listening hard and asking some good questions. Again, this is one of many opportunities you'll still have to provide feedback. Glenn from GLPR, thank you. David from Parsons. You saw Matthew and Lee from Metrolinx, as well as Lorraine from the region of Durham was on the line as well, ready to answer any of your questions. As I mentioned, check back to the Whitby Chamber of Commerce webpage dedicated to this project. It's been up for several months now, probably in the fall of last year. So we will continue updating the information. As mentioned, the recording from the session will be up by March 17th. And if you want more information about the public engagement, feel free to share it. We'll start posting on social. It's next Tuesday, March 16th, and all the details in terms of how you can provide feedback to Metrolinx directly or participate in the public engagement session is on our webpage as well. Have a great evening. Thanks for joining us.
Great. Thank you, everybody.